Hello everyone and welcome back to JT on the Go. Today we are back in the African American Museum for the third and last part of the series. If you haven't watched part 1, I recommend checking that out first. Then watch part 2. Then you can come back and check out part 3. In part 3, we will be talking about the time frame from 1968 to the present day. We'll be talking about some of the more historical events involving African Americans. But this chapter starts off on a very unfortunate note. In 1968, Dr. King made his last and my favorite speech from Dr. King, "I've been to the mountaintop."
I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
The next day, Dr. King was assassinated at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee by James Earl Ray. He was later arrested in London, England, and was sentenced to 99 years in prison. After word came out that Dr. King was assassinated, protests became more violent. Today, Dr. King is buried at his National Historic Park in Atlanta, Georgia. As for the motel he was assassinated in, it was converted into the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee. It is 2023. Civil rights leaders such as Dr. King, Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, John Lewis, Philip Randolph, and Bill Russell are widely viewed as American icons. However, in the 1960s, 180 years after the founders wrote all men were created equal, these men were not viewed equal by the American government or public majority. Their sacrifices can never be forgotten. The 1970s was the first decade of cultural rebirth. It began with the activist favor of the anti-war and minority rights movement during the Vietnam War. Affirmative action bolstered enrollment at universities where blacks were not allowed to attend previously. Black mayors were also elected. The African American middle class continued to expand. In the 1980s, enterprising women and men pursued advanced degrees and gained foothoods in professional sectors, but many families lost access to services that kept children supervised and off the streets when the Reagan administration abandoned key social programs. The 1980s was also one of my favorite decades when talking about African American history because of this.
Profile now underway. T-minus 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. We have engine start. 2, 1. We have ignition and we have liftoff. Liftoff, 32 minutes after the hour, and the shuttle has cleared the tower.
On August 30th, 1983, Space Shuttle Challenger lifted off with the first African American in space, Dr. Guy Bluford. In 1974, he earned his degree in aerospace engineering from Pennsylvania State University. He also got a doctorate in aerospace engineering in 1978 from the U.S. Air Force Institute of Technology. He later became one of the 35 individuals selected to enter NASA's training program. Then he became the first African American in space. In the 1990s, there was a growing influx of Caribbean and African immigrants. Black America grew more diverse culturally, but still faced racial discrimination. The 1990s was another decade of African American success.
10. CLS is go, so main engine start.
We have main engine start. 2, 1. Solid rocket ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of Endeavour on America's 50th space shuttle flight.
Houston now controlling.
Houston, Endeavour's with you in the hole.
Roger, roll, Endeavour. Roll maneuvers complete aboard Endeavour. The orbiter is now in a heads-down position.
On September 12, 1992, Space Shuttle Endeavour made history with a few firsts. One of them was the first African American woman in space, Mae Jemison. She joined the Astronaut Corps in 1987. She was later selected to serve for the STS-47 mission. In 1994, in South Africa, Nelson Mandela became the first president of South Africa from 1994 to 1999. Nelson Mandela led South Africa to be free from British rule. He was also inspired by Gandhi's work like Martin Luther King. Nelson's protests was similar to Gandhi's. He was thrown in jail for 27 years for protesting equal rights. After South Africa gained independence, Mandela became South Africa's first president. In the 2000s, Hurricane Katrina flooded and devastated New Orleans and the surrounding areas of New Orleans. Home foreclosures hit African Americans hard. Even some of my family members were affected by Hurricane Katrina before I was born. They left New Orleans to avoid the hurricane, but when they came back, they had to gut out the bottom of my grandpa's house. Most of the items could be replaced with the exception of family photos. Most of them were lost and gone forever. In 2009, Barack Obama was elected as the 44th President of the United States. He became the first African American to be elected president. He served 2 terms in office. His vice president was Joe Biden. In 2020, Biden would later go on to become president, and his vice president was the first woman and first person of color to be vice president, Kamala Harris. This video is going to show how people reacted when Barack Obama won the election. The crowds were roaring. And that brings us to the end of the museum. After the end, there is a special fountain that is found at the top. I have not really done this museum the justice it deserves. The depth into which half of my history is covered makes me proud. A history that should not be stricken, deleted, or rewritten. It is a must-see when visiting our nation's capital, along with the National Holocaust Museum, which will be a future video. We must learn from these museums that hate has no place in society. Thanks for watching this series. Subscribe if you haven't for more JT on the Go. This is JT on the Go signing off.